and local women. This brings us to the outrageous reality that in 2022, every 2 days, the world lost a person who dedicated part of their lives to defending territories where their life is threatened. Latin America is the most violent region for environmental defenders. And 125 of these homicides have happened in Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico, especially Mexico. The reported common thread being as impunity to perpetrators. The Amazonian basin, which, as you know, is at its environmental tipping point, lost 39 defenders last year, 11 of which were indigenous persons. Others have been harassed and suffered all forms of violence because of the essential role they perform in defending the most important biome of the global biodiversity conservation and climate action and the sustainable development of the region. 39. More than 1 in 5 murders happen in the Amazon region. Furthermore, the subjugation of indigenous and local girls and women for the purpose of sexual exploitation has increased, as have the cases of coercion, harassment, and abuse involving workers of the mining, hydroelectric, and oil companies. The reported number of this increment is as high as 66% last decade. And it goes on. As for the first 4 months of this year, the majority of at least 33 confirmed murders in the regions were of people defending the environment, their land, and their territories. I would first like to welcome our sister, Seisha Pitawari, Secretary of Indigenous Environmental and Land Management of the Ministry of Indigenous Peoples of the Government of Brazil. Secretary Seisha, we are very happy and honored to have you here, and we are looking forward to hear from your experience as an environmental and rights defender.
Boa tarde porque eu já almocei.
Afternoon for all. I have lunch because of this. I thought you have to.
Sou Seisha Pitawari, atualmente sou secretária de Gestão Ambiental e Territorial Indígena do Ministério dos Povos Indígenas do Brasil.
I'm Seisha Pitawari. I'm actually a secretary of Indigenous Management and Indigenous Territorial Management, Ambiental and Territorial Ministry of Indigenous People of Brazil.
Falar de defensores de direitos humanos no Brasil é um tema bastante delicado e também esses defensores sendo lideranças indígenas torna-se mais ainda perigoso.
And to talk about human rights defense in Brazil, it's a very delicate issue, and talking about indigenous defenders is more delicate.
Contando só um pouco bem rápido sobre a minha formação no movimento indígena, eu iniciei no movimento indígena, a organização de professores indígenas, da educação escolar indígena. No Brasil, a gente tem essa categoria de educação escolar indígena. São escolas indígenas construídas dentro do território e os professores são professores indígenas das comunidades.
Okay, just a little bit about my experience in the indigenous movement. I started as a teacher in indigenous schools. In Brazil, we have this. We have indigenous schools that all the teachers are indigenous and can talk about the language, the culture, and I start with this indigenous teacher.
Na minha região, a maioria das escolas indígenas, elas são construídas em territórios que nós chamamos de áreas de retomadas, ou seja, são áreas que não estão regularizadas ainda, mas que são dentro do território tradicional do povo.
My region in Brazil, that's the Northeast region, the majority of the schools are located at where we call retomada areas, that was areas that indigenous people usually claim that have traditional lands, but they need to reoccupy that lands and to start negotiation to demarcate it.
Então, diferente das grandes áreas demarcadas na região norte, na Amazônia, as outras regiões, essas terras são menores e muitas das vezes os próprios povos, as lideranças é que fazem essas autodemarcações. Então, isso causa um conflito entre os povos indígenas e quem detém aquela posse naquele momento.
Different from some demarcated areas in Amazon, the North region, the other regions in Brazil, like Northeast, particularly where I came from, the majority of the indigenous territories are less, smaller than Amazon region, and usually occupied by non-indigenous, so they have to start negotiations and sometimes not have to fight with them.
Por que eu falo isso? Porque, para entrar no tema de defensores, né, e protetores, as lideranças tornam-se, nesse momento, quando ocupam esses territórios, como os defensores do território e dos povos que ali estão, que ali vão morar, né? Então, aí é que entra o confronto e é que é preciso ter programas de proteção para essas lideranças.
Because why I talk about this, when we start to reclaim the territory land, the leaders for indigenous movement start being very advised by the non-indigenous, and we need to be protected.
O que é mais importante para os povos indígenas é o uso do território, é a defesa daquele território. Então, o território passa a ser, a terra é a nossa mãe. Então, se defende esse território com a própria vida. Existem alguns programas de proteção das lideranças indígenas no Brasil, mas nem sempre esses programas têm uma eficiência de proteção realmente da liderança. Se acontecer algum confronto, como já aconteceu, das lideranças serem ameaçadas, o programa em si, como ele não é adaptado para proteger lideranças indígenas, a característica principal do programa é retirar essa liderança do território. Então, isso é muito cruel para a liderança.
When we get into the defenders program in Brazil, nowadays the program has some limitations to the indigenous people, because we need to be on the territory, we need to be on the land, and this is the most important for us, to protect the land, protect the house of the indigenous people. But the circumstance of the actual program is to take the leader off to protect the person, not to protect the territory. So this is a problem by the actual program with the characteristics of indigenous people, indigenous territory.
Então, a liderança é responsável por proteger aquele território, proteger o seu povo e se proteger. Os conflitos acontecem os mais diversos possíveis, e aquela liderança é que vai ser alvejada. Então, vai desde o conflito fundiário com poceiros, desde o conflito na justiça, que é a liderança que vai responder, até conflitos internos em que alguns dissidentes entendem que a liderança é responsável, por exemplo, de trazer uma fiscalização, ou que a polícia possa estar fazendo alguma autuação dentro do território. Então, a liderança é alvejada de todos os lados.
The leadership for the indigenous movements has a lot of fights to do, and the first one is if the non-indigenous that are occupying the territory, the traditional territory. The second one is even in the justice, né? When the non-indigenous go to the justice asking to criminalize indigenous leadership, and the third one is even with some dissidents in the movement, so indigenous movement, because they sometimes are by the non-indigenous. So it's a very difficult, very hard to the leadership.
Então, nós temos no Brasil muitas lideranças que já foram ameaçadas, que fazem parte desses programas de proteção, e lideranças que já foram alvejadas com tiro e bala, né? Já foram alvejadas de outras formas. Eu passei por uma situação nesse sentido, trabalhava na Fundação Nacional dos Povos Indígenas, e um indígena fez um trabalho na comunidade e não recebeu a tempo, no tempo que ele esperava receber o recurso, né? Como eu trabalhava na fundação e moro na comunidade, então ele entendeu que eu era responsável por ele não receber o pagamento, e aí eu fui atingida com vários golpes de facão, que é uma faca grande, assim, no corpo, né? E a gente tentamos nos defender de todas as formas, mas era um homem contra uma mulher sozinha, né? Então, a gente que está à frente do movimento e que lidera um povo, um território, passa por esses momentos bastante difíceis.
Secretário, unfortunately, every year we have a lot of indigenous leadership that are killed. In Brazil, even this year we have some, and because of that, this continuous fight. So even the secretary has passed a situation when she, like a leadership from Itagori people, was working at the FUNAI. That's the FUNAI is yes, the foundation to support indigenous people before even the ministry was created to guarantee protection, to make all the studies for the demarcation process. So, CESA was working at FUNAI, and an indigenous member from the territory did not receive the payment for a service on the time, and he thought that the problem was with CESA and started to fight with a big knife, and it was a man against a woman, and almost killed the secretary. And yeah, so happy that she is here.
É importante pensar esses programas de proteção como os indígenas são protetores do território como um todo, mas pensar em quem está protegendo esse território. Então, nós vamos pensar, os indígenas protegem o território, protegem floresta, protegem água, quem protege os indígenas que estão protegendo tudo isso? Então, é preciso esses programas entenderem a partir da ótica dos povos indígenas, de proteção total e não de proteção dividida.
We have to think about how to actualize and develop the programs, because they need not only to protect the person, but they need to protect the land, because the leadership protect the land, protect the territory, the waters, and the whole biodiversity around. So the program needs to protect the person and the territory.
Uma outra uma outra ideia de pensar esses programas é se a liderança que foi atingida, que foi alvejada, ela não seja retirada do território. Essa é uma punição maior do que ser atingida naquele momento. Então, que esses programas pensem uma estrutura de proteger a liderança ali no território e não retirar do território para tirar do alvo.
Posso falar só um pouquinho também da história da Júlia? Other idea that we need to think about it is that the program cannot take the person off the land of the territory. It's very important that has a program that could support the person into the land. Other secretary from our ministry, Juma Shipaya, even was take the program take care of the territory land from the people Shipaya when she had his second son, and he was I don't have sure about 6-7 months, so she was taken from the territory from the family. So when the baby was need so much care, so there's some problems that Indigenous people has with the program.
Diferente da minha colega secretária, que teve que ser retirada do território e passou 3 meses na Itália sob proteção, eu mesmo, depois de atingida e entrar para o programa de proteção do Estado, eu decidi ficar no território. Quiseram também que eu me retirasse por um tempo, mas eu preferi ficar no território, e aí a gente se cerca da segurança dos parentes, né? De fazer o monitoramento, a segurança, até a gente se sentir seguro para andar novamente no território. Claro que eu não ando no território como um todo sozinha, mas sair do território é bem mais cruel do que ser atingido.
Different from my colleague, Shipaya, that needs to be out of Shipaya land and past 3 months in Italy, and says decided to be in the territory and needed to contact with all the indigenous people to protect her and protect to develop the protection of the land. It's obvious that she can't walk alone in some areas of the territory, but she decided to be there.
Os próprios povos é que fazem essa rede de segurança realmente. No final, se tem os programas, a proteção do Estado, mas se não for o povo organizado e pensando na coletividade, essas lideranças continuariam à mercê, né, do inimigo que está ali ao lado, que a gente nunca sabe se é um não indígena ou se é um indígena dissidente que está ali dentro do território. Então, é importante a gente se cercar de toda a organização e coletividade dos povos, pensando no território para as gerações futuras e não só para o presente.
Because this, we need to have a very strong and consolidated indigenous movement to protect ourselves, not to protect the environment, but to protect ourselves, because we don't know where the danger are. As a non-indigenous that are asking for the land, or even another indigenous that is an opposite of the leadership. So we need to really develop the whole indigenous movement to all the indigenous people.
Acreditamos que as leis no Brasil elas estão se aprimorando e levando em consideração o trabalho dos povos indígenas também, e eventos como esse contribuem para chamar a atenção, né, do mundo do que os povos indígenas, o que esses grandes protetores da biodiversidade estão fazendo e merecem receber também segurança.
Posso falar um pouquinho de utilização? We believe that that the programs in Brazil are developed. Actually, we have a working group that think about how to develop the human rights defense, to become not a program but a national policy. This goes in the same way about schedule. Not all that Brazil is not signed actually, but it's in the Congress, and we are waiting for the Congress to ratify schedule agreement. So we are anticipated and dialogue about all the strategies of the program and turn them into a policy. In some events like this, it's very important that we can show in the working group, show to our people and said that the other world are looking for us. Thank you.
Obrigada.
Thank you so much, Secretary Teza, for your message, for your testimony, loud and clear. Loud and clear, you said that protection is first-handly for protectors. Biodiversity protection policies and programs should first-handly protect protectors, and the protection of women is to be multifaceted, as the roles of women directly involve family and community, their integrity and their coherence. Coherency. I hope that's a word. Well, we will continue, and now we have our sister Carolina Rodriguez, Policy Coordinator for the ICA Consortium, a strong Afro-descendant defender, our sister that has suffered firsthand also what we are addressing today. She was so graceful to send us a message. Let me see if I can play it for you.
We have been negotiating and outlining the TDF in order to make clear from the governmental language the importance of traditional knowledge, the recognition of rights, solidarity between indigenous people and local communities, the recognition of the role of both indigenous and community women. I have presented the experience of traditional hunters who, from their customary occupations, seek to regulate and give adequate management to this activity from their knowledge of the forest, the animals, the culture, the local dynamics, in the promotion of biocultural indicators, the promotion of education and good territorial governance. Currently, this arm of authority of the Afro-Colombian community has been threatened for maintaining peace and defending the inter-ethnic agreements between indigenous Afro-descendants, here considered local communities. In my role as a member of the community and supporter of this body, the threat took a direct role, as I am the only woman in this process, as a conflict strategy to continue fracturing the community's biocultural environmental processes. I have encountered the following obstacles in my application for protection: lack of immediate actions of support and protection for the working bodies, lack of action groups for defenders, in particular for women environmental defenders, weak content and capacity of support teams for defenders, and issues related to social environmental conflicts with a gender approach, and requests for the psychological and legal support. Public institutions with inadequate and inconvenient mechanisms for the protection of life, dignity, and human environmental values at local and national levels. The permanent uncertainty about the security of women defenders in the territory, and the exhausting task of constantly thinking of survival strategies to defend the principles, or considering death as an act of struggle. Biodiversity is not a particular issue in the process of requesting protections, and if there is one, there is no clear system for it to be applied immediately.
This brings to the discussion other very clear elements. This lack of elements in the processes to consider not only women but also environmental defenders that are female. Please, Amelia, thank Carolina on our behalf and tell her that we are supporting her with our daily work and here in Geneva. Okay. Oh my God. To continue, our distinguished empathy and panelists are here to start a conversation on the vital contribution of women defenders. We want to explore concrete actions and strategies for their protection and discuss policy recommendations for their recognition and empowerment in the context of the evolving Article 8J work program. The critical role of Indigenous peoples and local communities, particularly Indigenous and local women, in achieving environmental goals and targets can be recognized in paper and in various scientific articles. We don't have to state that anymore. For the defense on the ground of natural resources, biodiversity, fertile soil, clean water, and the land where they live, as well as the human rights associated with them, is barely known and or disseminated long enough for society to understand its relevance and to participate in changing what things are now. But let us start with what we do have. The decision 1510 of the Conference of the Parties to the CBD recognizes the need to protect and support environmental and rights defenders. The adopted Gender Plan of Action emphasized the importance of eliminating gender-based discrimination and violence, with a special focus on women, environmental and human rights defenders and partner defenders. To comment on the hows and the whos, I am honored to present our distinguished panelists. Ruth Spencer from the Marine Ecosystem Protected Area Trust. June Robbie from the Global Council of the ICA Consortium. Maite Gonzalez from the Human Rights Center of the IUCN. From the International Land Commission. Dear panelists, as a guiding question for your participation, I would ask you how to highlight the central role of women environmental and human rights defenders, especially those from Indigenous peoples and local communities, in biodiversity conservation. Sisters, you have the floor. Please, Brooke.
Thank you. It's great to be here. My island is small, 100,000 people, and the lands and the seas are connected. So you must know it's very important that we protect our ecosystems. However, some of the projects that the government has approved are destroying our ecosystems. We have mangroves along the coast. They are first line of defense from hurricanes and storms. And if you remove that in favor of a hotel, that's going to give you some jobs. Does it make sense? Yet we are at climate, we are at all the international forums asking for funds. No, the people are smarter than that. Last year, our largest wetlands, 700 acres, was given out to an investor as a special economic zone. The government said they had to diversify the economy. But you know what happened? The people realized what was at stake. And we went out with cards, we were on the radio, we asked the whole island to come out and to see what was taking place, what we stand to lose. It had our culture, it is also a camping site. The people came out. The investor also came out, but I don't think he understood the importance of our ecosystems to our livelihoods. And a couple months after, he packed up his containers, removed the fencing, and he left. But he still owns the land, so we don't know what's going to happen. Another situation entails the spraying of harmful chemicals to kill mosquitoes. We suffer from mosquitoes infestation. And we noticed the bees were just dropping. So a shout had to be made. They normally would contact me and says, whatever is happening. And I got onto the focal point and I said, whatever you're using, the people in the territories are saying the bees are dying. And that's the basis for food production. And he called an immediate emergency meeting right away. So I had the groups come to his office and he promised that they would stop. He said they had like an inventory with these chemicals they were trying to finish up, but we told him they had to stop right away. Other kinds of advocacy cause a lot of problems. We don't have any killings like in Latin America, but we have harassment. Our Prime Minister calls these environmental defenders economic terrorists. You're trying to kill economic projects that will give you jobs, but we are more concerned about our environment. You know, the values of the environment, because when you damage one, other things are going to suffer in the process. So normally, if you're employed with government, sometimes you lose your jobs. But as our sister from Brazil said, we have ratified the Escazú Agreement. And that agreement has principles for the state to protect the environmental defenders. And so that makes us more bold. You hear us on the radio, we always keep mentioning, you have ratified the Escazú Agreement. We have the right now to be a new voice in decision making. We have a right to consultations, and that consultations where people have to go to the city. Come into our own little villages and communities, share your ideas and projects. We may not always agree, but we need to be consulted. We want effective participation. So those are just some examples of how we have our voices heard. Many times we are not notified what is happening. We just see signs on the ground. And those signs give us enough boldness to ask what's happening, because this thing about access to justice, you can't repair environmental damage after it's done. We have a hotel that destroyed all the mangroves. Guess what happened? Every time water comes, they're flooded. You have to move a whole community, and the government doesn't have the resources for that. So as soon we advise the groups, as soon as you see any signs of danger, you're like the first responders. Open up your mouth, say something. Thank you.
I forgot to tell our dear panelists that we have 5 minutes for interventions, and so we can move forward. Please don't take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eda. I'm gonna repeat the question so I can remind myself as well. You asked about how can the international community highlight the importance of women environmental defenders in biodiversity conservation. Is that right? I just want to start off by saying, well, thank you to the Secretary Sessa for your wonderful, inspiring words, but also the Women Caucus for organizing this very important side event, and my distinguished panelists. I'm very honored to be sharing this floor with you today. So Eda, when you asked that question and listening to Secretary Sessa, I was very much inspired. And I just also wanted to reiterate the message that she has shared with us today. Because when we think about environmental defenders, what do we see in our mind's eye? You know, we think of maybe protests. We think of really powerful images of, of people fighting against powerful forces. But yet Secretary Sessa pointed out that the reality of being an environmental defender is actually really quite mundane, day in and day out. You're living in the territories. You're defending your territories by existing in these territories. And because you exist in these territories, you are therefore a threat. And I think that is something to remind ourselves of women particularly in remote communities living in Latin America and Africa and other regions, where, as Ruth also pointed out, the differences in the harassment that we face as Indigenous women and also local communities are vastly different depending on the access of information that you have, whether you're close to urban areas. I'm an Indigenous Bidai woman. My community is pretty close to the capital city of my state. So the types of harassment we would face as defenders is very different from our sisters in more remote communities in Sarawak. So I therefore always like to think about more of not just within the context of my community, but also broader. And I think that's how we should always consistently think about environmental defenders who are women and the differences between us as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Please, Mike, can you tell us your ideas?
Thank you, Eda, and it's my pleasure to be here in this panel. Thank you, the organizers. I always like to start any conversation by recognizing the history, the story life of the persons. So I would like to start recognizing the life story shared by the Secretary and also by Carolina through the message, because just by recognizing, I think that we are starting in the correct path of correcting past and present harm. Regarding the question, Eda, about how we can highlight what is happening, I think that there are several pathways of action that we, from our organizations, from our communities, and as an individuals, we can engage in. First, I think that it is important to continue bringing the visibility to the problem. There is I would say, general knowledge about general gender-based violence, but I think that emphasizing the linkage between gender-based violence and the environment, and then particularly highlighting how that violence is even stronger against a specific group of women, which is the women and girls from Indigenous communities, is a very important first step. Not necessarily this is something that is clear for other audiences. So by start producing data, generating evidence about the scale of the problem, I think that it's an important starter. And secondly, once we have the data and we have generated the evidence, which is huge, because we know the size of the problem, then producing effective campaigns to put the information in the hands of the public and in the hands of the policymakers and the authorities, I think is an important step. And what I'm going to say might be not politically correct, but we have to recognize that in most occasions, the perpetrators are in the side of the authorities. So that creates an additional level of complexity in terms of how we design strategies to act in the problem. Secondly, these campaigns, I think that should go to the very different angles of the problem. Yesterday, when I was attending the IIFB press conference at the end of the afternoon, one of the presenters responded to the question of the difference between Indigenous peoples and local communities. And it was very interesting, one angle of her response, because she said that one of the elements, basic elements, is the attire, how you address it. You represent a culture. And then she said that in her country, Indigenous women would wear a band with a tail at the end. And she was saying that they were recognized as the funny people with the tail. So creating a sense of respect is an important step of making visible the problem and giving a face to the victims who are people exactly facing the other threats that we all have. For my last minute, Eda, I would like to emphasize also another pathway which I think is important, and I am doing some echo of the words of Ruth in terms of creating clear pathways to access justice, to implement the instances that are already in place. We know that we have at the level of the UN the Special Rapporteur on environmental defenders. We do have the Escazú agreement that Ruth already mentioned in the Latin American region, which is the region where this tension about land tenure rights, Indigenous peoples, women is one of the highest. And then establishing clear pathways to how to access justice, I think is another important contribution that we can give. And finally, Eda and colleagues, my guess is that by promoting research and supporting project implementation in the ground, targeting the problem of gender-based violence against women and particularly against Indigenous women and girls is also a way that the community can highlight the role of women and answer to the question of who defend the defenders that was raised by the Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your words. Now we have Eva, please.
Share my screen.
Do you want to go to the
Okay. Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Perfect. Can I what? A few technical, let's leave it to the person with the presentation. Sorry about that. It's a real honor to be on this panel, of course, and to be speaking about some of the work that we've been leading with the Allied Coalition to try to better capture, quantify, but realizing the limits of quantification of this kind of violence, yeah, showing a bit the process, and I'll come back to the question that was posed by Eta. My name is Eva Hirscher. I'm the land monitoring and data lead at the International Land Coalition. We work, we're a member-based coalition, more than 300 members across 84 countries, and we have a number of different data sets that we work with, trying to capture across a diverse membership items, trends, questions that are of priority, that are common urgency across the coalition. One of those, and it was defined in consultations with our membership in 2017, was the concerning ongoing trends of violence against Indigenous land and environmental defenders. And this, forgive me, is the acronym I've used here. Allied is an international coalition of organizations focused on coordinated promotion of the enabling environment for these defenders, also coordinating advocacy work, support for them. And ILC leads the data working group that's trying to bring together an integrated database of attacks against these defenders. So the data working group, and I'll skim over our process. This is an outdated list of the members of the group. But suffice it to say that we're around 20, sometimes more, sometimes less, organizations that are working with data on defenders. We're a subset of organizations of Allied. And as you can see, many of these names you might know, it's a mix of organizations that are doing local data collection, documenting requests for protection and support, also regional and then well-known global data collectors such as Frontline Defenders. So we do two things like the data working group. We're ourselves groups of a group of civil society data collectors, but we also look at what the state is doing to monitor and report on the situation of these defenders. We know that civil society organizations have long been documenting these violence, and that's the bulk of our work, is organizing ourselves to say something about that data. At the same time, we monitor what states are reporting, what states are doing to understand the situation of defenders. So annually, we release a crucial gap, a report that is looking at what states have reported in terms of violence against defenders in their countries. To do this, I'm sorry again for the acronyms, we review all of the voluntary national reviews that are submitted to the high-level political forum to see to what extent defenders, violence against defenders is mentioned. And then we review the SDG database. We know that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Framework, has an explicit indicator that tracks violence against human rights defenders. Environmental human rights defenders being among them. And these are snapshots here, but of the 162 countries that have submitted voluntary national reviews since the SDGs were endorsed in 2015, only 3 have reported that one human rights defender was killed in their country, far from what we know the reality to be. So the SDG 1610.1 provides us with an entry point. This has a methodology and a custodian. OHCHR is the custodian of this, and states, as well as human rights bodies, should be reporting data against this indicator. However, there's a big variance in the kind of data that is available in the indicator. And if you go to the SDG database and download the data, you will see regionally aggregated attacks. You can see these numbers in the table above. It might be kind of small. It aggregated at the regional level. These numbers are very difficult to use. We know that there's a lot of violence in Latin America. Where is it happening? What kind of violence is it? What types of attacks are most common for women? We ask a lot of questions of this database that we cannot answer. Women are visible, but at a regional level, again, which is not very useful. And environmental human rights defenders are not distinguished from the rest of human rights defenders, despite knowing that these account for more than half of all of the attacks. So what we have been trying to do, we call it the hidden iceberg, and you'll see in the next slide why we use this metaphor. Among all of the data collecting organizations, we built a common template. We defined common definitions. We established common categories and criteria, verification methods that we thought were acceptable. And we built a template that would allow us to put all of the cases collected by all of these different data collectors into a single form. We recognize always that this is an underestimate of the violence. There are many challenges in getting this data and integrating it, but we felt in the absence of official data and acknowledging the important work that civil society data collectors are doing, putting themselves at risk as they do so, we wanted to try to say something together to try to approximate the scale of the violence that they knew was occurring. So an initial effort was made in 5 countries with 9 data collectors. We integrated the data across these countries for 2021. We were testing a process and a theory, so that we thought that together, looking especially at non-lethal attacks, we could say something about the kind of violence that's harder to verify, less often published in the media. So here you see the results of this first first pilot, across the 5 countries, there were 137 killings. This is Global Witness's figure, and they're observers of the group, and we have referred to them for killings because they occupy an important space in this debate. They've made the topic very visible, and instead we focused on non-lethal attacks, the attacks that are harder to verify, that are less likely to be published, that are not visible. As my panelists here are highlighting, they're being threatened, they're being criminalized, they're being discriminated against. These are not captured by the media, these processes. These are very hard to verify if you're not working with organizations on the ground. In 2023, we updated the icebergs, let's say, for Colombia and the Philippines. These are not to scale, really. Both of the underwater icebergs would be off the charts. But you can see that when we did we cast a wider net in Colombia and we found more non-lethal attacks. Only in 2021, this is 2021 data, 1,300 non-lethal attacks were verified by local data collectors in Colombia. That's a huge number, and we know for certain that this is yet an underestimation of this. I won't go too far into the data, but we see that threats represent nearly half of all of the non-lethal attacks that are reported. Again, this reinforces the need to work with local data collectors, as from a global perspective, using publicly available sources, it's impossible to capture threats that are being levied against these defenders. Those protecting land and territories represented 96%. Indigenous peoples across all of the countries were disproportionately represented in the attacks. Then we can also identify other variables, the sector that's involved, the alleged perpetrator. We can look at what they were defending, if they had other affiliations. I'm just highlighting a few of the things that we can pull out of the data set. In the Philippines, maybe echoing what a lot of us know is the case there, judicial harassment was the leading type of attack. 88% of all of the attacks documented were defenders that were protecting customary rights, lands, and territories. And the alleged perpetrators most identified with these attacks are the armed forces and the police, raising important questions about the rule of law and the role of authorities themselves in these attacks. So I haven't spoken about women explicitly, but this is a very important element of these icebergs. You can imagine that we could slice the icebergs and zoom in, looking at what the violence is for women specifically. So women remain invisible in many data sets, not only because this data isn't collected, but it's often not published. So a number of the local data collectors we work with, in their published data sets, they don't give gender, which seems basic, right? That we need gender-based disaggregation in order to know. So we've been working with a lot of the members of the data working group to build this in, saying we never report data if it's not disaggregated by gender. The kind of violence, as you saw in one of the previous slides, it's overwhelmingly men that are attached to these attacks where data is available. However, we know that violence against women is underreported for a number of reasons. The kind of attacks they face are often less public. It can be violence perpetrated by members of the own community or within families. It's also specific kinds of violence. It can often be sexually based violence that they face, and there are challenges to reporting this and to coming forward with these kinds of attacks. So women appear reported at lower rates, but this is an area that deserves much more attention and analysis, and we're working to get better evidence, better data that would allow us to do more of that analysis. So an opportunity, and now I'm finally coming to Enda's question, for biodiversity framework, we know that in Target 22, there is a complementary indicator that was retained that recognizes the importance of trends against these defenders, disaggregated by country and by gender, and the number of Indigenous defenders needs to also be highlighted here. As you can see, the data is available. It's available in some cases by official data sources, in some cases by the custodian, but it needs to be disaggregated to the country level. We also, it's difficult to see IPs, and Indigenous peoples are even harder to see. So there needs to be a lot of work done on the way that this data is collected in order for it to be reported in a way that is meaningful and that gives due visibility to women defenders. So for us, we're going to continue to expand and refine the database. We're testing currently an integration of support organization data. There are a number of mechanisms that provide protection, rapid support. How can we use those logs to further understand the kind of violence that is being perpetrated in the request for support coming in? We need to update the data sharing agreements and safeguards. Some of this data is very sensitive. You can imagine that killings data is easier in the sense that if you're reporting a process of threats or criminalization, you need to protect a defender that is still very much alive and needing to be safe while being able to report this kind of non-lethal violence. We also see big blind spots in the data. We know that in Africa, there's very little data. So we're also building defender capacity of local organizations to document these attacks and to systematize them in a way that would allow them to be pulled into these processes and made visible. I'm sure I went over 5 minutes. I'm really sorry. And I gave you my back, which I'm sorry about, but I'll stop there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Evan. Well, what I gather from our distinguished panelists is that we have to be visible. We have already talked about that and argue about that in our interventions. We have new words: practical participation. Ruth talk about practical participation when she talk about the Escazú agreement. This is a new word for me. I've been here for ages, and this of practical, it's like music to my ears, because we keep on talking and talking and talking and talking, and what practical, we need practical to implement, you know? And this brings me to data collection for policymakers. But we should not, this is my personal opinion, we should not forget that there are other stakeholders to comply with this. So as the community that Ruth talked about, that stopped the project, that's a community with the private sector. This is another route to explore. And then giving a face to reality, to this reality, the campaigns and everything, giving the face to this reality. I think we have to flood social media with this reality. I think there are many, communication specialists and many key champions that would love to champion this cause. Why we have to move on. So I will jump to the final question, because these interventions have gathered information and provide information from both the first and the second question on what and how. Now, my final guiding question would be, which policy recommendations and strategy would you suggest to strengthen and integrate the protection and empowerment of women as environmental and human rights defenders in the new programs of action of the 8J and in the Gender Action Plan? because I hope they will be living instruments for implementation. They should, so we can keep on strengthening the part. The mention of we have to. Thank you. Maite, you have the floor. Okay. Maite, please.
Yes.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. No, if you
That's fine.
Después, okay.
Thank you, Eda. I think that there are two very clear pathways that can be taking advantage of the existence of the Gender Action Plan for the CBD. I think the first one is to establish linkages at the national level with the Gender Action Plan of the Convention. I think that is a first necessary step, and that could be done not only by including specific gender-related provisions in the NBSAPs, in the national strategies of biodiversity and in the action plans, but also in the gaps analysis that are conducted in the countries, usually in the context of climate change and gender, because that is something that is is getting like very common. And there we can also use that as an instrument to make this more visible. So establishing clear linkages between those instruments, I think, is a critical step. And secondly, I would think that it is never enough to mainstreaming gender in all the public policies in the countries and permanently reviewing what is being done around that. Because now we see a trend to say that yes, this policy is gender responsive, is gender sensitive, but to what extent that is really happening. So making a gender test of the existing policies, I think it's also an important policy step. And just one additional minute to say something that I think it's important also. In our organizations, we are conducting efforts to not only make visible the gender-based violence linkage with the environment, but also to action on it as a problem. So I think that we should find a way to establish a channel of communication and information between the lessons learned that we are getting from the projects in the ground and how that experience, that knowledge is feeding actually not only the national policies, but also what is going on in the global policy arena. So establishing those linkages between evidence that is being generated and the provisions that are taken in the national, regional, and global sphere, I think it's also a key step. Thank you, Eda, for the question.
Thank you, Maite. Please, John.
Thank you, Eda. And if I may, because my first statement I felt was a bit too brief to compare, and I would like to expand if I have a bit more time. So as mentioned, I represent the Global Council for the ICCA Consortium. And because of the work that we do in all regions of the world, in Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America, we also have the three different themes that we think about in regards of the work that we work alongside Indigenous peoples and local communities. So that includes documenting territories, which is the global chair that I hold. We also have sustaining livelihoods and also defending territories. My colleague Milka Chepkori, and then she's an Indigenous woman of the Sengwer people of the Chenarai Hills of Kenya, cannot be with us today. But she was formerly our council member for Defending Territories theme, and she's now working with our policy team and secretariat. And if I may, she did send a brief intervention that I would like to share with all of you today. So Milka says, while many discussions and strategies focus on individual human rights and environmental defenders, the work of many Indigenous women working as a collective is often missed, ignored, or not recognized. This is because somehow the definitions of who a defender is does not reflect on the collective, which often has more power, less attacks, unless in situations where the leaders of the women groups are discovered and have better agency representing the collective of their communities in the collectives of women. Of communities in the collectives of women. So in this sense, women are breaking the barriers of council of leaders in their communities, being the only ones who can negotiate on behalf of communities, on territories, and the welfare of these territories and the people. And she shares 2 examples in Africa that I'd like to share today, which is the Ngorongoro Maasai women in Tanzania. So despite now being evicted from their lands, they have been such great defenders of their territory using the traditional Indigenous benefits they got from their land. During the evictions, women came out to confront the leadership of the area and intervened for a stoppage of evictions in Ngorongoro. Even if their pleas were not heard successfully, we are aware that women are among the witnesses challenging the Tanzanian government on their displacement. The second and last example is the Sengwer women of in Kenya, in the Chengerai Hills of Kenya, which is Milka's people as well, are using their Indigenous roles to spread collective defense to the youth and children of the community. So they do this by teaching the children about the community and Indigenous ways of conservation that are then used to challenge those who come to the territories with practices that do not respect Sengwer principles. So they also collectively work on restoring some of the parts of the territories which have been degraded over time. And that very much brings us back to what Secretary Serza had said about women living in these territories. And very much it is what it feels mundane, but it's the everyday practice of like living your culture and defending it and confronting when people come into the territories and try to do harm in various ways. I just also wanted to say, and thank my fellow panelists, Eva, I mean, thank you for reminding me. I mean, I get caught in that trap as well to think about more explicit harms towards women because I feel like, well, it hasn't happened to, you know, to yourself personally, and it's violence, it's vile, like the killings and even more, you know, like explicit violence that we face. But you brought up also like the other acts of harm, which I've also mentioned, and I just reminded myself how important that is to continue to document. And I think as women as well, we're conditioned, you know, by society and how we grow up to always dismiss the harms that we face. I mean, in doing so, it's so funny because we also think about Indigenous communities and Indigenous defenders, but it's also ourselves in a sense, and putting that harms, you know, in its place. And how do we then recognize the harms that are being enacted upon Indigenous women defenders? So that, I mean, that's a practice now I'm starting to rethink. But going back to your question, Edda, and thank you so much for going first. So I'd like to support the points that you've made. And also, I think in terms of policy strategies, I think it's important to stress legal protections and strengthen legal frameworks, as you mentioned, not just globally, but also it's more important nationally, that explicitly address the violence on women environmental defenders. Particularly in a conservation context, we see, for example, bingos now trying to address harms that are enacted by because of conservation projects onto, you know, Indigenous lands. So they have what they call, you know, like some sort of like a response or in regards to these harms. So I think we should also think about emergency response mechanisms or protection mechanisms, and how can we support and strengthen, if there are any that exist in, you know, or create better rapid response mechanisms to address threats and attacks promptly. Because one of the challenges and issues that we see in the communities that we support is that women in particular in these communities, they do not receive the aid that exists in it. I mean, it gets filtered down, and the women who experience the greatest harm see none of that aid. And also finally, like we need to think about a holistic approach. So thinking about legal protections, community engagement, how do we continue to support communities in recognizing harms upon women? You know, if they also live in very patriarchal environments, how do we support that? And also what we're doing here today, which is also that was supported by the Women's Caucus, which is the international advocacy, the hard work that's done every day. I see Amelia and your team constantly like working day and night to ensure that that we have all this the gender disaggregated data emphasized into the frameworks and the work plans. As my co-chair hat, it was interesting to see and also very it was wonderful to see the support that the parties expressed every time the Women Caucus gave interventions. There was always support for that, and I just hope it actually solidifies in in this new program of work that would be more beneficial and helpful for the environmental women defenders around the world. So thank you for your hard work, Women Caucus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will ask Eva to a quick, so the secretary can give us our closing remarks. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's my turn to be brief now.
Yeah.
I think that in terms of policy recommendations from where the data working group is standing, it's important that states establish their own monitoring body and start reporting on the situation of human rights defenders and distinguish Indigenous land and environmental defenders. One way of doing this, and another call to action, would be to establish an independent National Human Rights Institute with the mandate to collect this data and to report it. And then, of course, to engage with civil society data collectors to recognize the role that they play, but to not forget that the burden of tracking the situation of these defenders stays with the state. Yeah.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you. Okay, now for final message, por favor.
Realmente as mulheres sofrem uma invisibilidade. É preciso trazer, né, nas recomendações, o papel fundamental que as mulheres indígenas desenvolvem nos seus territórios. As mulheres em geral, nós temos coisas em comum, somos mulheres, defendemos territórios e isso nos coloca na linha de frente.
We agree. No, I agree with you. The other I think that woman is invisible in information. And all here women, and we need to we are defenders of our territory, so we have we know the situation that our experience must be part of the education, be part of the how the data is being collected by the convention.
Penso que os financiamentos têm que ter linhas específicas para as mulheres, porque só assim se dá visibilidade ao que o trabalho e o que está sendo desenvolvido dentro dos territórios.
I think that the project must be projects directed to support the women practice of defending the biodiversity, because only this we can exactly support the protection.
E os países eles têm que entender nas suas legislações ações específicas para atender as mulheres. Então, no Brasil, a gente está trabalhando, por exemplo, existe uma lei específica de proteção à violência das mulheres, mas existe o trabalho também dentro dos territórios indígenas. Essa lei não abarca tudo o que acontece dentro dos territórios, especificamente para as mulheres indígenas. Então, no Ministério, a gente está trabalhando um programa chamado Mulheres Guardiãs. São pensamos em espaços em que possa ter o cuidado com as mulheres indígenas que sofrem algum tipo de violência dentro dos territórios.
All the countries need to be specific legislations for defend the woman, but even this legislation is more general. So in our ministry, we are creating the project to the indigenous guardians movement that is to create a house in each territory that organize the work and the people to protect more the woman in their job in that place.
Outro programa é o Guardiões do Clima, pensando nessa perspectiva de que nas mudanças climáticas quem vai ser atingido primeiro são os povos indígenas, são as minorias. Então, está trabalhando também um programa de Guardiões do Clima que vamos formar a nossa juventude e os nossos povos como protetores do clima e da natureza.
We are creating também the Guardians Climate Program. That's it's a program to emphasize even with the earth how to protect even more the biodiversity and the climate, because we know that with the climate change will affect more the indigenous people, so we need to have more the earth and human guardians of the biodiversity.
Se entendendo, se não tiver esse recorte de gênero na participação feminina, nós nunca vamos conseguir chegar até aqui se não tiver esses esforços concentrados.
And if we don't have a gentle perspective in all the program policies, we will not get here and we will still be in effective parenting. So this is necessary to be the convention.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you for all the comments of my sisters in the panel. I am so happy to call you sisters, no? Well, my family is all sisters, so I'm used to it. Okay, well, we have here very important messages, strategic messages. Let's jump into the climate arena. This is where the money is and where the money wants to be. So let's jumpstart there. Something we have to take to learn, to jump up in the learning curve. We don't start from zero. Let us at least copy what is happening. Then you make me think about communicators here, please. What about a Green Me Too movement? That would be great. I don't know your opinion of that, but I see it all over the place. So maybe something like that in the right direction can work. About strengthening the legal frameworks. I myself have worked in writing down legal acts, laws, standards. You have to work with Congress. You have to move the women in Congress, because providing information is always useful for policymakers if you tell them what, why, what for, and how it will be useful for you in the political sense. This is horrid, but it's the truth. So we have to jumpstart this. And also, for example, what to put in the legal framework. In Mexico, we have an environmental law, and then in the environmental law, it is forbidden to give permits to infrastructure development in lands that has been burnt. At least it has to pass 20 years. We really don't care if it was burned because someone burnt it to build something or because a lightning stroke. We don't care. The point is, you cannot use that land to change land, the use it had, no? Maybe something like in that direction. Because visibility is very hard to place in legal wording. So learning from other countries, as the secretary has already given us some examples, can also shorten the learning curve. With this, my dear sisters, dear brothers, and everybody that is here with us. I would like to open the floor for some questions. We only have space for 2 because obviously we have to run to the main room because something very important is happening there. So please, other member of this interesting group of interest in defending defenders that are not part of the Women Campus would like to ask, comment on something. Firstly, no, all right, okay, and then we go for our sisters in the Women Campus.
Can I speak from here?
Yeah.
Loud enough? No, I just wanted to thank you all for having this wonderful women and strong women for sharing your testimonies and putting a strong light on this issue. I'm just reflecting as a woman. So I'm not even gonna say which organization I work for. Doesn't matter at this point. But I wonder to what extent it is something that June put the right words on. Women in many cultures are used to, and it's not just about Indigenous women, it's local women, it's other women as well. In my own culture too, we are supposed to resist, to be resilient, to stay quiet and suffer. And so I wonder, there is a huge phenomenon now, especially in Western countries, about violence against women. It is not necessarily environmental defenders in general, but how many lessons we can learn and we can share to build, the enabling cultural and psychological condition, because I think a lot is because women don't say they're being harassed. They don't consider that an harassment. To raise that awareness, I think, is also very important. Thank you, and
Thank you very much. Cecilia, you wanted to share something.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm loud enough.
Yeah.
On my part, I think I'm very enlightened every time I listen to dear sister speaking. One thing for the Eva, there are societies where even if violence occurs against a woman, there's negotiation between communities to make good and keep it quiet. You might have a problem collecting that kind of data. So, and besides that, now I want to turn to the secretary and the gender champion from Colombia, right there. I want to ask, since we have this Article 8J as a big opportunity, is it now an issue of political will where you can actually call a ministerial meeting and ask for commitment or a declaration that in view of the importance of Indigenous peoples, amongst which are Indigenous women and girls and children, that we will now do things differently? Maybe the political will at that level will help. And if it doesn't happen at this level, I'm sure the Women Caucus with our coordinator here will be happy to attend whichever forum you organize. And there are many organizations here to say, yes, indeed, this is a must do as one of the things that we must achieve in this framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia, very much. The last one, I have been asked that Daniel from Kenya wants to present us with some comments through the voice of Yesenia. Okay, so we have a fellow male activist in this regards talking through Yesenia. That is.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this heartbroken side event. And I think my conclusion today is that women give us the life, and I give life for nature. And we need, of course, access to justice, and we need to be protected. But right now, at this time, many women are facing violence, and especially our sisters from the Obiek people. My brother Daniel Kobe is very highly, and we are highly concerned about this. And I think, or I would like to invite all of you to show solidarity, on to say how do we can get the attention or support our brothers and sisters that are suffering those evictions. I am really concerned about this. And with regard to the panelists' comments, I would like to address the CEDAW 39 recommendation on Indigenous women. I think it's a good frame to work on this. And finally, I think we need to ask for the governments, for the international agreements, make us visible, give us justice, and protect us from violence, because we are protecting life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yesenia. Thank you, Daniel, from our behalf. Well, we have come to the end of this side event. Please take with you these testimonies, these ideas. I know that here in Geneva, here in this room and here in the main rooms, there are lots of brains, whatever the gender, but there are lots of brains coming up with new ideas, not only reading what they have prepared for being here. Let us move there. Let us move to the new ideas. Let us jump the learning curve. Let us start by working in a strategy that can make change happen really quick for our brothers and sisters in Tanzania, from whatever it's happening around the world. We need the protectors on the ground. We need them. We need them. So how are we going to help them? Thank you very much. Please keep in
May I say
contact.
a word?
Of course, mate.
Just to pick up on Daniel's, I think that, and what you're saying, I think that building new masculinities around this problem is a strategy that is in our hands. Much of the violence is happening, yes, it's lethal, but it's all happening at the level of the household, yes, inside homes. So building new masculinities in specific sectors, in fisheries, in agriculture. I think that if we do that, maybe that will not be in the policy side of the problem, but it will be nearby the care service that is given by women all across the world, and it could make a difference. Sorry for that.
No, no, sorry for anything. You are absolutely right, Maite. That is why the gender plan of action is gender, no women. No? Gender, and women as providers of new and fast forward knowledge for the new generations. I hate to talk about the next generation because I've been here forever and they are always talking about the next generation. I've been all the generation and nothing is happening. So please don't use the phrase about for our children. No, it's for us, and for us women especially, because we are making the next generation textually, emotionally, economically, and everything. So we are, period. We are, as the statement a few hours ago, we are here. We are partners and we are actors. What about you? That would be my final question. Thank you so much. She wants to respond to you, Cecilia. Yes, going to respond to you.
Claro, se nos colocar aqui enquanto ministério, claro que a gente pode se comprometer em apoiar cada vez mais a luta das mulheres. Esse é um propósito do nosso ministério, um ministério novo ainda, com pouco orçamento, mas é um compromisso do presidente Lula, que todos os ministérios eles são transversais na na pauta de gênero das mulheres. Então, nós temos o Ministério dos Povos Indígenas, que tem uma pauta específica, mas tem o Ministério das Mulheres. O Brasil também tem o Ministério das Mulheres, que tem a pauta específica das mulheres no Brasil. E
Also, we are committing published in commitment to the program and projects for human defense and to implement the discrimination here. We are a new ministry, we have a few budget in that. We have another ministry in Brazil, that is Home Ministry, that is, we are creating some policies together, each one with their specialty. But we have this commission, this is a President Lula Awards too, so we would like to be gradually involving more.
Só para finalizar, só colocar que nós todas somos irmãs, né? Então, as mulheres são como rios, crescem quando se juntam.
Yes.
That we understood.
But
Thank you so much, Secretary. Yes, these words are our new mantra.
not everyone understood.
I am so sorry.
We are women, we are sisters, and we are like rivers that we grow up and we are together.
Yes. Oh.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Please take and disseminate this message.